Hello and welcome back to another video where I cover the situation in the Middle East. This one will be specified at not something that has happened, but at something that will happen, and pretty much everyone is very sure that it will happen. This is based on the fact that multiple US fighter jets have been sent to Israel, not to mention additional US military presence in the Mediterranean Sea and in the Gulf of Oman, here to the south of Iran. The United States is sending an additional aircraft carrier group to the Middle East in preparation for what it believes will be a multi-day strike by Iran and Hezbollah, which is stationed in southern Lebanon, on Israel. This NBC article talks about the situation. Israel is bracing for a potential multi-day attack by Iran and its ally Hezbollah following the assassination of two senior militant leaders last week, an Israeli official told NBC News. He talks about how, compared to the last time the Iranians sent a wave of missiles and drones, about 300 in total, combining the numbers of the two, where both the missiles and the drones ended up arriving at Israel at the same time. The drones took multiple hours, about 12 hours, to arrive from Iran to Israel due to the long distance and the slow speed of the drones. Therefore, the drones were launched much ahead of time of the missiles. This gave the Israelis a lot of time to prepare and also allowed the Israelis and the United States, as well as France and the United Kingdom, among other countries, to send their jets into the air and shoot down some of these drones ahead of them arriving to Israel. The current situation is that Iran has already tested Israeli response and Western response. The Israelis know that, the West knows that. That is why they're preparing for something much larger, something much more dangerous than the last one. They expect the same thing to happen, but on a much larger scale. Now the Iranians have tested out the Israeli air defense with the help of the United States and the West. They know how much response they can expect. This is why, as the Israelis expect the Iranians to up their game, they will also up their own game. This is why we see the United States sending additional weapons and jets to the Middle East, the same with the United Kingdom reportedly, and additional countries. These are all being prepared to help Israel defend against an Iranian attack. According to the official from Israel who's talked with NBC News, he says that the Israel fears waves of missiles and drones could be fired over several days in response to the killing of the two political and military leaders. They'll just try to wear us out, the official said. The two officials who were killed was a Hezbollah commander who was in Beirut and one of the Hamas leaders who was in Tehran in Iran during the inauguration of the president of Iran. So we see that these two officials were both killed within a few days of each other, and both happened at the capital of Lebanon and the capital of Iran. This is a major slap in the face of Iran and a major embarrassment to these countries, as it means that Israel is willing to and capable of striking Iranian and Lebanese soil at the very heart in their capital centers. The Iranians previously responded to Israel by striking 300 projectiles towards Israel, which did no significant damage, but proved that it as well could strike Israel ground. The Israeli response last time, which happened in April, was very lackluster in comparison. A few FPV drones that didn't really do anything. This raised a lot of questions, of which there were very few answers. But some created a theory stating that it was not Israel that attacked Iran, but it was instead the United States which did so, claiming Israel did it. The reason for this was to de-escalate the situation and prevent the Iranians from going into an all-out war with Israel. Israel was not satisfied with that because their response to Iran was so lackluster that it ended up embarrassing them. That is why at that time, when I reported on what happened, I believed that that was not the real strike and an additional strike was coming. Turns out that was true, because the real strike of Israel was completely unrelated to these things, but ended up being the assassination in Beirut and Tehran. Now, Iran sees this as an escalation compared to what they did. They believe that their previous strike on Israel made them even. Israel believed that that wasn't so and that they had to strike back. And therefore, we end up in this situation where now Iran believes that they have to strike back. And if this strike is large enough and actually hits Israeli targets in Israel, then we may expect another Israeli response to this, and it could continue to escalate. If it is not significant, then Israel could see that as a green light to invade Lebanon, because the only thing that is preventing Israel from invading Lebanon to get rid of Hezbollah, the same way that they invaded Gaza to get rid of Hamas, is that Lebanon and Hezbollah are direct ties with Iran, and that could risk a significant escalation to the current conflict. Israel does not really want war with the entirety of the Middle East, but they can deal with a war against Hezbollah. Now, the United States is against this, and we know this based on the fact that this Israeli official says the obvious, but he states it, therefore we know and can confirm our thoughts to be true, and that is that there is strong US pressure to reach a ceasefire. Biden wants it to happen during his time in office. So we know that Israel is being pressured by the United States to stop the war. That is the clear opposite of escalation. Yet we see that this escalation happens, and the Hamas official that Israel assassinated was the very person they were negotiating with in Cairo, with the Qataris, with Hamas officials. All of this was happening, and now Israel has assassinated the very person they were talking to. But this clearly shows that Israel has no intention of seeking peace until they reach their goals. But their goals cannot be reached with the current situation, and this is why Israel wants to deal with the biggest threat to its operation right now, and that is Hezbollah. This is redirecting Israeli forces between the south and the north, creating a more difficult situation than it really needs to be for the Israelis. Hezbollah has been spending the last 10 months of the conflict between Israel and Gaza to launch missiles and other strikes into Israeli territory. This has caused fatalities among Israeli soldiers, a lot of wounded among Israeli soldiers, and Israeli civilian areas have also been affected, to the point at which Israel had been forced to evacuate several hundred thousands of civilians away from border areas, not just between Israel and Gaza, but also between Israel and Lebanon. But the current situation is not at all favorable for Israel, neither domestically nor internationally. With some research pointing towards at the very start of the conflict, within the first week of the war between Israel and Gaza, about 65% of the demonstrations all throughout the world were pro-Palestine and 35% were pro-Israel. Where at the time between the first week and now, the demonstrations that were pro-Israel dropped from 35% just 5%, and the protests that were pro-Palestine increased from 65% to 95%. This has shown a considerable increase in the support for Palestine throughout this conflict, and a significant decline in the support for Israel throughout this conflict, mainly caused by what we see at the end of the article, and that is diplomats have been working to avoid a larger regional conflict war in the Middle East since the October 7th Hamas terror attack, in which 1,200 people were killed and 250 kidnapped. While the ones who were killed at the start of the conflict on the Israeli side are pretty much all who have been killed since the start of the war, not counting the soldiers, the vast majority were casualties from October 7th. The 250 kidnapped, some have been released, some have been freed, some have been exchanged, and some are still captive. The majority of the conflict's consequences on Israel, in terms of human lives, was on October 7th. In comparison, the Palestinian loss of life has nearly reached 40,000 people since the first week, since the first day of the conflict, significantly outnumbering the Israeli casualties. And this significant amount of casualties that is completely disproportionate to what the Israelis have suffered, yet the Israelis refuse to stand down and sign a ceasefire. This had led to significant increase in support for the Palestinian cause. And that is not to mention the US government pressure on Israel to reach a ceasefire. So we see that the current situation is clear, and that is that Israel cannot continue the war despite it not reaching the goal due to the circumstances. And not reaching the war goals leads to the perception of the conflict being that Israel has failed. Israel needs to completely eradicate Hamas for it to have succeeded, because that was a stated war goal at the very start of the conflict. This is something that US analysts criticized Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, for at the start of the conflict, because he set the bar so high, and previously in the previous Gaza war and the previous Lebanon war, that similar thing happened, and that ended up being the cause of the politicians' end of their career. So we see that the current situation is that Netanyahu does not wish to end the war before they reach the war goals, but due to the heavy pressure, they cannot continue it. Therefore, they are at a position where they can either escalate, get a reasonable reason to justify them continuing the war, or they can reach a ceasefire. It seems that Israel is going for the escalation part, and that is why these two assassinations came in. The reason these types of assassinations took place is because Israel does not want to start a war against either Hezbollah or Iran. Instead, Israel wants to be defensive in this war. To simply explain it in a very, very simple manner, if a country is attacked, then the likelihood of the general population of the world supporting that country is significantly higher, even if the attacking side has a justified cause for the attack. Instead, if someone attacks a different country, even if they have a justifiable reason, not everyone may necessarily support that reason, or agree with that reason, or agree with the war taking place. Therefore, if Iran and Hezbollah attack Israel, it is much easier for Israel to justify that war compared to Israel attacking Hezbollah or Iran. This is why Israel's goal is to provoke Hezbollah and Iran into a conflict. And similarly, Iran has an interest in provoking Israel to start a war, because that will allow Iran to ask for help from other Middle Eastern countries. Therefore, we see that it is very clear. This is a game of chicken. How much damage can one side do to the other without starting a war, yet provoke the other side to start the war? This is what we're going to see with these upcoming strikes. Will these strikes be too much, or will it be just enough? And what will Israel's response be? Because right now, the ball is in the court of Iran. What will they do? And based on their actions, Israel will have the ball on their court, and they will have the choice to do what is next. So we'll have to see what is going to happen, but what is very clear is that the situation has significantly escalated since 4 months ago, and the current situation is extremely dangerous because we are on a very thin line between simply striking each other's country to all-out war in the Middle East that will include many Western nations, including the United Kingdom, the United States, and other countries, much less the devastating effects it will have on the people in the Middle East, specifically in Israel, Palestine, Iran, Lebanon, and whichever other country will be involved in the region. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out my Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.